Thank you so much, Donna. It's always such a pleasure to hear you speak. Our next speaker, it was actually a very wonderful surprise when I moved here to San Diego to discover that Jeanette Peterson lives here in San Diego, and she was kind enough to visit our North County Chapter Support Council last year to deliver a wonderful paper. And today she will be speaking about Sor Juana and the Virgin of Guadalupe. She is professor of art history at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Jeanette's teaching and research have focused on the field of pre-Columbian and colonial Latin American visual culture. Her long-standing interest in the intersection of European indigenous visual cultures has led to several articles on the images in the Florentine Codex. Her most recent book follows the transatlantic trajectory of a Marian devotion. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Jeanette Favrot Peterson to the stage. Jeanette, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's always so wonderful, I think, to be at a symposium that's this rich in content, to see how presentations begin to have a dialogue with each other. And so we find that there are common issues that several of us are addressing, and you will hear some of the same themes and see some of the same images, but I think in every case there's a different facet that's brought up. But certainly in the Hispanic world, with the global circulation of artworks, you are going to encounter issues of authorship, of reception, of the relationship between model and copy. So that's what makes it, I think, extra exciting to be in the presence of so many other great scholars. Among the splendid pieces in the museum's golden age of Spain, we are fortunate to have two masterworks from Mexico's foremost 18th century painter, Miguel Cabrera. On the left, you have Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, whose acquaintance you've already made, and 9 years later, his Virgin of Guadalupe with apparitions. These powerful women, and we've already heard about feminist power in the Hispanic world, made an indelible imprint on the Mexican consciousness. Today, I focus on one of their shared traits, their mutual claim to be faithful copies as well as true portraits. And we'll come back to these details again. The genesis of the copies ultimately derived from different realms, one reputedly heavenly, the other a lived experience. Yet both participated in a lineage of signs that gained in authenticity by virtue of being duplicated. The power of these facsimile copies seemed to reside in the emulation of a previous prototype. This raises very interesting questions. Can we reconstruct the mechanics of this process and the motivation? Both of these paintings are prominently signed. Why would a painter boast that his paintings are part of a chain of replicas? I should note that in this time period, copia, or copy, could refer both to an imitation of an existing image or to a retrato, a portrait in the modern sense, that is, capturing the idiosyncratic likeness of an individual, a capability strengthened by the advent of photography. To begin with Sor Juana, there is a long-standing fascination with this remarkable author who doubly defied the conventions of her time, both as a female and as a nun. Although illegitimate, Juana Rodriguez de Asbaje was a precocious child with a prodigious intellect, one she fiercely protected all of her life. We have very few biographical details, especially of her early life, but lore has it that she was reading at age 3, learned Latin in 20 lessons, and won prizes for her verse before she was 7. Her move to Mexico City as a young teen marked a turning point in her life, as she was protected in the viceregal court, where she could advance her education, and she was greatly admired for her intellect as well as her beauty. Joining the Hieronymite order at the age of 20, she became Sor Juana, or Sister Juana. In her own writings, she admits to escaping marriage by entering the confines of a convent, where she was sequestered for her remaining 27 years. Hers was a privileged life, as she occupied a multi-roomed suite and had servants. The uniqueness of Sor Juana's portraits are thrown into relief when compared with typical depictions of women, and we've just seen some in Donna's presentation. They were represented in one of 2 roles, that of the wife of a wealthy aristocrat or that of a nun, the only other road open to women of means who chose not to marry. Their background remains neutral, but is particularly austere in the nun's portrait. What a dramatic shift in the earliest painting of Sor Juana that we have by Juan de Miranda, some 18 years after her death. Sor Juana's singular position in Mexican society as a woman scholar can be compared to the dignified pose and learned context of Garcia Guerra, a Dominican archbishop, whose portrait is also happily in the exhibition. Miranda's portrait depicts her standing at her writing pulpit, magnificent in a habit of white satin, long pleated sleeves, and a hoop skirt. She is caught as if spontaneously in the act of writing a poem, and we can read its title. It's called, in English translation, Green Rapture of Human Life. 2 inkwells, a letter opener, and 3 volumes of her own work that are here, Juana de la Cruz. And I think it's great, he numbers them 1, 2, 3, point to her great productivity. Sor Juana's output was impressive and included plays, essays, theological treatises, and some 216 poems, from ardent love sonnets to songs, as well as a vast global correspondence. A glass container with a plant specimen, and a paper inscribed with a geometric formula also point to a wide-ranging curiosity of her active mind. Patterned on the Miranda portrait, Cabrera represents Sor Juana seated and interrupted in her reading. She is rifling the pages of a volume on St. Jerome, who is the patron of her order, and there is a breviary nearby. As in the Miranda, she fingers her rosary, accentuating the tension between the life of the mind and the life of the spirit. However, Cabrera relaxes Miranda's formality, and his loose brushwork creates a more naturalistic figure. Cabrera's debt to the earlier portrait is alluded to in the long inscription at the base of the painting, where we can read, and here I'm referring to this section, you see it in detail here. Portrait, quote, portrait of Sor Juana is copied faithfully from the true copy in the convent of San Jerónimo. That's the beginning of the inscription. And we think, we're not certain, but we think the Miranda portrait actually was in the Geronimite convent. Now, Sor Juana's pose again mirrors the portrait of a male prelate. In fact, one of Cabrera's major patrons, the Archbishop Rubio y Salinas, and I just saw this portrait which is wonderful, in the Boston Museum of Art. Cabrera accentuates Sor Juana's immense library. She referred to her books as her 4,000 friends. We estimate her library was maybe half of that, but even so, very impressive for a library at the time. Their titles are highlighted on their spines. In addition to volumes by the Church Fathers, there are classical authors, Ovid, Pliny, Herodotus, books on medicine, poetry, and on painting. She wears a giant devotional badge known as a nun's shield, escudo de monjas. The medallion effectively neutralizes, even sublimates, the wearer's sex. Her physiognomy, in other words, is subjected to a theological concept. Sor Juana's badge depicts the Annunciation, when God's word is revealed to Mary that she will carry the Christ child. Sor Juana called Mary, quote, Mother of the Word. And here she is shown, that is, Mary, the Virgin, with an open book on her prayer stall. Perhaps you can see it. This is the Cabrera portrait that's in the exhibition. And here you have Mary praying, the book in each case. The degree of self-identification with Sor Juana's own intense preoccupation seems certain. Two more of the 7 extant portraits of Sor Juana reveal the serial nature of these paintings. The space of Sor Juana is now reduced, and her activities are those more acceptable for a nun. As the dark backgrounds become more claustrophobic, her library disappears. Just as in the last years of her life, she was ordered by her confessor to dispose of all her books and direct her time toward good works within the convent. 3 years later, Sor Juana died of the plague. Of all her extant portraits, none that we are certain of were painted from life. This 1692 engraving is the earliest image we have of Sor Juana, found on the frontispiece of Volume 2 of her works that were published in Sevilla in Spain. Octavio Paz has speculated her portrait may have been patterned after a miniature on a ring that the wife of the viceroy, who was very close to Sor Juana, carried back to Spain with her in 1688. But that's pure speculation. Most scholars believe it to be imaginary, conforming to a beauty ideal that was part of the hagiography that accompanied Sor Juana's growing reputation as a literary figure. In consequent engravings after her death, she slowly becomes ever more deactivated, stiff, almost doll-like. If we assume that the 1692 engraving, or one close to it, was the prototype for all succeeding copies, Sor Juana's portraits are invented. As her posthumous fame grew, her reputation transcended a likeness drawn from life. Her portraits became surrogates for her persona, and she was transformed into an archetype of the humanist scholar. Like Sor Juana, images of the Virgin of Guadalupe were created in duplicate. Although Guadalupe's origins are believed by many to be otherworldly, she enters the human domain as a material object, a painting that has generated thousands of lookalikes. By Cabrera's day, Guadalupe had proven her divine protective powers over Mexico. The devotion was firmly implanted, and a new basilica, the third, was completed in 1709. And it's quite identifiable because of the 4 towers that are on each of the corners. You can see them here. And this is the 1709 Basilica that was restored about 10 years ago and is now very beautiful. Her image was appropriated as a political symbol of Creole proto-nationalism. To be Catholic in New Spain was to be an ardent Guadalupano. In addition, her apparition legend was now well ensconced, published, and visualized in art. The earliest version we have is in this large altarpiece-like painting by Jose Juarez of 1656, and it's in a cloistered Conceptionist convent in Agreda, Spain. And what I want you to notice here is that the apparition legend is told on the wings of what looks like a triptych, really, and notice the text that tells the story underneath each of the images. A century later, the apparition legend is so orthodox that Cabrera could do away with the explanatory text and relegate the episodes to 4 corner medallions. The upper scenes, in the upper right, depict Mary's visionary appearance to Juan Diego, the native seer, on the hill of Tepeyac, north of Mexico City. In the lower left, she provides roses to Juan Diego as a sign of her supernatural powers, and these he is to take to the skeptical church authorities in order to have a home built for her, which is her request. The climax is in the lower right, where Juan Diego spills forth the roses out of his cloak, where he's collected them, and the flowers are replaced by her image. This is considered to be the miraculous cloth venerated in the Basilica of Guadalupe today. In the pivotal event, Cabrera emphasizes the miraculous cloth as a painting rather than an item of clothing. I found this really interesting when I looked closely at the painting in the exhibition. Most of the 4th apparitions show her still imprinted on Juan Diego's cloak or mantle, as you see here and here. However, Cabrera no longer positions Juan Diego behind the cloth, but instead he is a bit marginalized, and she now really is the painting that is hanging in the Basilica. Keep in mind that the sacred icon is already a copy, only an imperfect reflection of the celestial being on which it is patterned. And that being, of course, is invisible and unrepresentable. What remains consistent is the design of the Virgin of Guadalupe that conflates various Marian iconographies, primarily drawing on St. John's description of the woman of the Apocalypse from Revelation 12:1, surrounded by solar rays and poised on a crescent moon. And we've seen numerous examples already of the Virgin as the Immaculate Conception, which is essentially how she becomes codified with this iconography. The growing demand for copies of the miraculous cloth helped fuel so many inferior and shabby imitations that the church posted strict regulations. The better artists in New Spain used wax paper templates of the Guadalupe cloth painting that captured the precise number of stars, solar rays, tilt of the head, and position of her prayerful hands. It is this that allows Juarez to write under his painting, quote, "True portrait and exact copy of the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe." Moreover, there was a long-standing belief that the replication of a holy object's precise dimensions, these were called mensurae in Latin or medidas in Spanish, captured the innate power of the originating icon. To permit the transfer of sacred power from the miraculous artifact to its copy, like a spark from an electrical charge, the copy was put literally in physical contact with the icon. And that is the meaning of what is very often at the base of Cabrera and other artists' depictions of Guadalupe when they write, tocada a su original, touched to her original, which can be interpreted either in metaphorical terms, patterned after the original, or quite literally that the canvas was taken and put in contact with the miraculous icon. In the 9 years between Cabrera's two portraits, the painter's association with the Virgin of Guadalupe catapulted him to greater heights of fame. In 1751, he was part of an investigative team of doctors and other painters who were tasked by the church to examine scientifically the nature and manufacture of the Guadalupe icon. The team noted that the cloth was of palm fiber and that 4 different painting techniques had been utilized: tempera, oil, gouache, and watercolor. Although well-known materials, Cabrera concludes in his 1756 treatise, Maravilla Americana, that the rare craft of this composite went far beyond the capabilities of a human artist and thus had to be of supernatural origin. Reason bumped up against faith. By 1754, Pope Benedict XIV declared the Virgin of Guadalupe patroness of New Spain, based in part on a copy of the sacred cloth that Cabrera himself had created and sent to Rome. And herein lies the dilemma. A vision provoked a picture, but another picture confirmed the reality of the initial visionary act. In his treatise, Cabrera also stated that the miraculous paintings such as Guadalupe's was the work of angels, even of God. God, having fashioned the originals, is pleased that copies of them can be created by human handiwork. This assessment of the Guadalupe cloth became a pretext for exalting the rare craft of painting. Thus, Cabrera had a professional agenda in recreating a perfect simulacrum. He was at once exemplary copyist and inventive creator. With his signature alone, Cabrera fecit in Mexico in 1759. With his signature alone, Cabrera is making competing claims for his skill and professional status during the campaign to elevate the visual arts in New Spain. And I want to draw your attention, the painting in the exhibition does have the Basilica at its base in this section, and you see the 4 towers of the 1709 Basilica. And then, unfortunately, somewhat cut off by the frame, se tocó a su santísimo original. The canvas was touched to the original icon. In Sor Juana's case, a flesh and blood human being was elevated to a sign or an emblem. From the outset, the Virgin of Guadalupe's appearance to Juan Diego was called a great sign after St. John's vision. In neither case can we verify by objective means the originating portrait of these famous women. However, in both, the multiplication of their true copies serves to authorize and disseminate their legendary reputations. Thank you.